Yariv Mozer is the director of Surviving October the 7th, We Will Dance Again, the new documentary that's being screened on BBC iPlayer, having premiered on the BBC. And it's also available on Paramount Plus in the US. So I'm very pleased, Yariv, that you're here to talk with me about the film and a bit about how it came to be. So thanks very much for joining me. Yuri, first off, I know that this film, for many people, will be the first time that they got to see some of the more shocking footage that had been, until then, only seen by journalists, diplomats, people like that, who'd been invited by Israeli embassies around the world to view GoPro footage from the terrorists themselves. And I wanted to talk to you a bit about how you made the decision to put that in the film, and indeed how you acquired it and wove it together in such a masterful way to tell the story.
Well, I was keen to bring the truth of what happened on the 7th of October. It was, you would say, my unsigned deal with the survivors that came and opened their heart and told their stories very openly, very bravely, and shared whatever happened to them on that horrific day, and also brought their own footage. Most of them used their cell phones to capture those horrific moments of this massacre. And at the same time, I wanted to bring the other angle, and the other angle is Hamas. Hamas terrorists, as you're saying, were using those GoPro cameras to capture those atrocities, at the same time upload them to the web. But Hamas understood very quickly that it harms their image, so they took off a lot of the footage. So it was a struggle against the Israeli police, which didn't collaborate eventually. But I insisted on getting this footage to the film, so it will be reliable, so people will understand and will believe that this is exactly what the survivors are saying in their words. And eventually we did succeed on getting a lot of it. I mean, full footage, video files of Hamas.
So one of the things that I noticed watching it was that you juxtaposed the two sets of footage really in a very skilled way. And again, I thought it was very impressive that you didn't have a voiceover, a narration for this film. You allowed the interviews and the testimony of the survivors to speak for themselves. But also, of course, these videos spoke for themselves. And you put together, to tell the story in a narrative, the footage that the partygoers had filmed, both before, during, and after the atrocities, but also the Hamas footage. And one thing that stood out to me, I wrote about it in my Spectator piece, was that you noticed that all of these people who were by definition secular Jews, because it was Chag, it was a festival they were partying on, all in their time of utter doom and despair, quite a few of them said Shema Yisrael. You know, they said this prayer that, for those who don't know, Jews say every day, religious Jews, but also at the time when they're facing death. And then you put that together with quite a few occurrences of the terrorists shouting Allahu Akbar. Now, firstly, I assume that was deliberate, that you tried to show that both groups invoked God in very different ways. But did you think that that was an important point to make in this film, that the Jewish people, secular as they were somewhat unified by their religion, and that the Arab terrorists themselves also were acting, in their opinion, in the name of God?
First of all, to be very accurate, some of the survivors in the film are sharing the fact that they come from religious families, but they did allow themselves to go to this party without telling their parents or families, so not to harm their feelings, because it's not allowed to go and party on Friday night. And many of us secular Jews we do consider ourselves very much Jewish. It's part of our identity, even if we are not practicing the Jewish religion in a very harsh way. So I'm saying Shema Israel I would say on a daily basis. I mean, every time I'm landing in Ben Gurion Airport, I'm saying Shema Israel. It's a thing I took from maybe my grandparents. So it's very common. And to hear those Hamas terrorists shouting jihad, jihad, you understand that this is a war that they're taking, or a war against Western civilization, Western values. This is, in my opinion, it's not only against the Jewish people or against the state of Israel or part of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is devastating as it is, but this is something bigger. These are people, fundamentalistic believers that are there for a bigger cause. They want their jihad to be completed, and they didn't differentiate between Muslims, Christians, and Jews while massacring inside Israel and kidnapping, by the way, also Arabs. So you have Bedouins still captured by the hands of Hamas till this day. So yes, of course, by translating the words of Hamas, which was very important for me, I wanted people to understand exactly what is standing behind their beliefs.
Yeah, and I've actually been watching the preview of a Channel 4 documentary that's coming out about Be'eri on the anniversary as well. And I note that certainly in the preview copy I've got, they don't translate Allahu Akbar. They leave it untranslated. So it is interesting and important that you did that. Now, I do wonder then if you feel that that was one of the most important messages to get across, that, you know, these people who are invading didn't once mention in their own home movies of this attack creating an independent Palestinian state or coexistence alongside Israel or even occupation. They mentioned, as you said, nation of jihad.
Because that's, if I do want to differentiate between the Palestinian people and Hamas, Hamas does not consider the existence of Israel or the existence of the Jewish state or considering the Jewish people as something that you could have a dialogue with, or that they respect as a people. Not, doesn't matter if it's in Israel or outside of Israel. They're against Western values in general. Unfortunately, they were elected by the people of Gaza to be their leadership. So in a way, although I see the Palestinians in Gaza as victims of Hamas, but they chose to be the victims of Hamas, and they are very much in favor and cheering Hamas's atrocities on that October 7. You can see it also in the footage when Shani Luke is on the truck entering Gaza and people are cheering, spitting on her body, eating cakes. I mean, whenever things like this are happening in our side, I must say, I haven't seen nowhere in Israel people cheering up when those beepers were exploding in Lebanon, when Hezbollah was targeted. So that's, I think, is the difference. I mean, we are celebrating life. The Nova Music Festival was a celebration of life. They are celebrating death. This is the way I see it. And I apologize if it does sound harsh.
Well, may I just say, you shouldn't apologise. And I think that's a lesson that many of us have learned since October the 7th. We need to stop apologising for hating people who explicitly declare that they want to kill us. I think there's nothing more natural than hating people who want to kill you for no good reason. And I was in Israel, actually. I just arrived for my last trip on the day of Eid al-Bipa, when all the pages did explode. And I will say there were people who were joking or I wouldn't say celebrating, but they were pleased with the achievement, this spectacular achievement. But as you say, it's a completely different spirit. There was no baklava being handed out on the streets. There was none of that kind of celebration because of death. There was simply a celebration after 11 long months of grueling war in Gaza that the IDF and the Mossad potentially had achieved this spectacular strategic victory, which, as we see, is mapping out now in Lebanon in Israel's favor, largely speaking. But so just to go back to the survivors themselves, because they also gave these incredibly moving interviews. And again, some people have had the opportunity to hear survivors from the kibbutzim and from the Nova Party speak already, but many people around the world hadn't. And I think that for me, what you made here, and I don't mean to overdo it, but it's like those films we saw of the concentration camps upon liberation, because what was so important in that era was that the world got to see, broadly speaking, a wide audience got to see what had happened, because some people knew, but most people didn't. Have people who've watched this film on the BBC or elsewhere got in touch with you? Have you had a response from anyone who had their mind changed, that until now all they'd seen on the BBC itself, for example, was this constant tidal wave of anti-Israel bias about Israel conducting genocide and all of that, and then they saw actually what happened on the day? Have you had many responses like that?
I must say that yes. I didn't have a film that succeeded getting so many people watching it in such a broad, for such a broad audience. So yes, I keep on getting a lot of emails, and my Instagram and Facebook profiles are open for people to message me. So I'm getting tons of messages of people saying exactly this. This film opened their eyes. This film, in their perspective, was the first time they could understand exactly what happened on October 7th. Unfortunately, I wasn't aware that it was so, unclear for people that this happened on October 7th. But yes, I keep on getting those messages. And in fact, it makes me happy. In that sense, that people do understand exactly what happened.
It is extraordinary that some people didn't realize, but then on the other hand, this is, to many people not in Israel, not related to Israel or connected to Israel, just another news story, however horrific. So I suppose it is good, if that's the right word, that they have this opportunity to see really what happened. And I think that for me, I watched it thinking nobody could watch this, whatever their opinions of Israel and Palestinians and the conflict might be, and be anything other than utterly distraught and wrecked by hearing the experience of those survivors, and also learning the stories of those people who didn't survive. And I think that's to your great favor that you did that very successfully. It was not a political film, right?
Exactly. Unfortunately, I must say that there are some, one of your British colleagues, a journalist who attended the world premiere of the film at the New Zealand Dock Edge Film Festival, a very prestigious one in which we won 2 awards. But at the end of the film, he asked me, he was sure he read it in Haaretz, which I don't think he read it in Haaretz, but this was his, to say, quote, "If I think that those kids dancing near the border of Gaza are like the family of Rudolf Hess, the head of the commander of the Auschwitz camp in the film The Zone of Interest."
Yeah.
So in a way, he blamed those kids, and they are kids, although they are in their 20s, for dancing near the border of Gaza, and therefore they do deserve the atrocities that Hamas committed on that day. And it was a shocking question for me. I'm a third generation of Holocaust survivors. They were my grandparents, and I was shocked. I didn't know what to answer. In a way, I've started apologizing, which I wouldn't do today, but I was really completely out of words. And but it does tell me what people do think and how people what is their perspective on Gaza and what happened on that day, which is saddening. It's really sad to think that this is how they see the things.
It is. And I think that, whatever one might think of having a party close to the Gaza border or anything like that, the idea that that could justify any of those horrors that were detailed in the film anyway is utterly unthinkable. I think it says more about somebody that would ask you such a question than it does about any of the people who were attending that party. And I would like to also to know a bit more about what you make of the fact that this was the first time most of the world has the opportunity to see this sort of footage? Because for me, there's here in the UK, there's a lot of controversy about the BBC and its coverage of Israel, but specifically since October the 7th, but not, of course, starting then. And I watched a lot of that sort of footage from the word go, and it was accessible to people who wanted to search for it in the dark corners of the internet, or even quite accessible from Telegram and WhatsApp groups and the like. I was amazed that the news didn't show any of that footage. Now, you spoke at the UK screening that I went to about how news gets there first, but documentary lasts, if I can paraphrase what you said. And that's very profound. But I do wonder why the news didn't get there first and show some of that footage. What's your view on how much of that footage should have been seen in news broadcasts? It was available, some of it.
It was available, and the shocking thing is that it was the same here in Israel. So Israelis are not, it wasn't available for them as well. The Israeli news completely didn't show those things on TV. And as I said, also the Israeli police and the Israeli military, the IDF, didn't collaborate with journalists officially and film directors like me to give us access to the footage. And I think it's unfortunate. I think that people should be capable and it should be available for people to watch. And therefore I placed it in the film. It was one of my goals. We invested a lot of time and efforts to get our hands on this footage, which we did unofficially, and I will not be able to share how. But maybe this is the role of documentaries. When we come much after news, we have the ability to show something else and to bring the bigger picture to people out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, as I said, so important that you did do that. Now, I'd like to touch on something that is a little bit of a distraction, I feel, but it's worth discussing because there was some debate here about the word terrorist in the film. And I don't want that debate to distract from or detract from the historically significant and important film that you've made, and the fact that the BBC has put it on air and on iPlayer for people to see. I think those are really important things to say first off. But there was a controversy about whether or not the film was allowed to say the word terrorists, because for the entire duration of the war, the BBC has resisted calling Hamas terrorists, except in reported speech. So the IDF says, Israel says, individuals might say in an interview that they consider someone to be a terrorist, but the BBC has this very peculiar and increasingly entrenched view that they must never call anyone terrorists. Now, let's put aside the fact that they often break that rule themselves when talking about domestic terrorist attacks here in the UK. We'll just give them the idea that they don't like to say it because they feel it's an unhelpful phrase. Now, I know that the word terrorist was actually used extensively in the film. It was there over and over and over again in the interviews from the survivors, and it was on one of the text frames, because there was no narrator, but there were a few frames where you wrote editorialized text. But again, it was very factual. Now, let's get to the bottom of this. Did the BBC have a discussion with you about whether or not and how you could use the word terrorist in reference to Hamas?
Yes, because the BBC are not willing to call Hamas a terrorist organization. Therefore, whenever it's being said by one of the survivors, by the IDF, or anyone which is not the BBC, it's in the film and it's indicated in the film. But whenever it's a factual message on the screen, a factual captions on the screen, and it's as if it comes from the film itself. So this is where it will be written as Hamas without Hamas terrorists, which you could see in the American version. So that's a slight, in my point of view, not so significant difference between the two films. I was in favor all the way that the BBC will show the film as they want to show it, with this slight difference. And I think the achievement of bringing this film to the BBC and having executive producer Lucy Kahn as our, in charge of this film and making this happen, this was a huge achievement. So for this slight difference, it's a very small price to pay.
Yeah, Lucy Kahn, of course, being Jewish, I believe. So, I don't expect you to have a go at them for it, but I do understand perhaps why some people in the UK have. And as I said, I don't want it to detract from the film itself and the amazing job that you did. And in fact, I will say, I think you snuck one through there, because in that one frame, it says the IDF says 3,000 terrorists entered Israel, and the word terrorist isn't in quote marks, which is a BBC staple. So they weren't 3,000 terrorists. They were actually, it was reported speech, but without the quote mark. So bravo on this tiny victory. But what it did go noticed by me. I will say that from my perspective, I feel quite happy saying I think it's pretty terrible that they did have that conversation with you, that they did have some negotiation, that it's different from the US one. And I just say, bad form. But to your credit, you don't notice it at all when you watch the film, and mechablim is translated constantly as terrorists, or as gunmen, or militants, or anything like that. So I'm very pleased that you stood your ground where you could. So just to wrap up our conversation, I want to know really if you see this film as I do, having a sort of long life. It's not just a documentary that came out now. For people to see now on the first anniversary. But what do you think will happen to it? How will it live on as a documentary maker for you? How significant will it be in the future?
Well, it depends on people watching it and delivering the message to other people that are not so willing to go and watch it. I mean, and I feel, from what I feel, this is what's happening exactly now. So the film is available and on places like the BBC and Paramount Plus. Very big. It was aired on RTL, commercial channel in Germany, primetime, on October 1st. These are great things happening. It woke up a lot of people to understand what this film is about, to bring the evidence of October 7. I'm sure it will continue and be there and will be part of history. And I think that that's making this film bigger than me, than all of us, than the team of doing it. It will have a life of its own, and that's the most important thing.
And in terms of that, I think that you did another thing which certainly I noticed, which is it's very unflashy. You didn't choose to have any kind of stunts or glossy production things that stood out. You were really back to basics, very simple. You let the people speak for themselves. You had this carousel effect with the interviews. That was about it in terms of editorializing visually or textually. And I do think that for that reason as well, it will stand up to the test of time as an important historical document of what happened, because just really, and actually maybe you can just mention a little bit about this. The thing that you did brilliantly was, even for people who'd seen those sorts of pieces of footage, and many of those particular pieces of footage, you wove them together to tell a narrative, a story. You really made people understand minute by minute what happened. You followed not just chronologically, but threads of different characters through it. And there was that, I noted there was this sort of dramatic irony that we saw them arriving and we saw the faces of Hirsch, Goldberg, Polin, or we saw Shani Luke, and we all knew what happened to those people, or many of us did, and yet they didn't in that moment. So I think, how did you manage to do that? Because it was quite an achievement to take this kind of sea of random footage and turn it into a story.
Investing a lot of time in the editing room and working with two brilliant editors that won an award in New Zealand, Yasmin Novak and Roy Balbierski. Both of them are working with me for several years on a lot of projects, and we understood each other, and we invested a lot of time, and we took it as our mission. We were diving into October 7th for almost 10 months, living it over and over again. It had a price on us as well. but it's nothing compared to what the survivors had to go through. So I'm happy that we did achieve telling the story of what happened on October 7. And to be honest, I think we will still have a lot to tell in the future.
And well, I mean, it's difficult. I'm a second generation Holocaust survivor. My father was a hidden child in Italy during the war, but so I hesitate to compare things to the Holocaust. But I think so many of us over the last year have just reached for that because there were certain things about it, and I really got the feeling from the film where you just realise Jews being chased through fields, being gunned down. You know, these are things that we thought were historical, even those of us who are close to them. So I think you did bring that out, and I think that was important. And I will just give a nod. I would like to ask actually about sound design. I think you must have had a brilliant sound designer because a lot of this footage I know was without sound. Some of the gunshots and things like that. And again, I didn't think it was flashy, but some of it I presume was added because you needed to bring the soundless footage to life. Or did I imagine that?
No, you didn't. It is part of the film. I think it was a combination of the work of the composer who wanted to use sounds from the real events, and at the same time the sound designer, composer Tal Yardeni, sound designer Shacha Vakshal. Both of them are already working with me on several projects. In fact, they both worked with me on The Devil's Confession, the Lost Eichmann tapes, which was on the BBC as well. And it was, as you were saying, it was a challenge to make the music also to have some elements from reality. So we took those elements and enhanced them, so people will have the effect of being there, almost being there on the ground. And it all came from the survivors, them telling me the noises that they kept on hearing, the sounds of the guns, the sirens, everything mixing up.
Yeah.
And that is the feeling that I wanted to express in the film.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the most striking images, you mentioned it earlier as well, actually did have its own original sound, was Shani Luke in the back of that truck. And I will never forget, it just from the moment I saw that footage, of all the things in it, it was the little child in a red t-shirt who spat on her body. And I just remember seeing that and thinking, he's not a Hamas terrorist, he's a child. And the people partying around that truck were not terrorists. They were Palestinian Gazan citizens celebrating a prize of war that had been brought back, which was effectively the dead or nearly dead body of a woman that had clearly been, I guess, raped. And I couldn't understand, and I hope that other viewers who see it feel the same, how that is culturally such a world away from what we saw from those people attending the party who all emphasized love, togetherness, love of music, love for strangers, love for each other, love even for Palestinians and those people on the other side of that fence that were so close to them. So kol hakavod on
and
this film.
Just to say, Jonathan, I don't blame this child. He's just growing up, being educated to hate and to deeply hate Jews, and therefore he behaved the way he behaved. Children are being taught in a way, or they do take example from their parents and society. And that is something that the Palestinian people must ask themselves, and look at themselves. We also have things that we need to look at ourselves, but that is not the case. Our children are not studying in school and kindergarten to hate people. It's not part of their studies.
I mean, it's a conversation I've had a lot with Israelis I know, and you know, many of them actually since October the 7th have said, I was educated from as early as I can remember that one day we won't need to have the army. One day we will live in peace with Palestinian neighbors. One day there will be two states. One day we will coexist. This is the overriding refrain of most Israeli cultural education. And it's very clear from images like that one of that child that it's not mirrored just, you know, meters away over that fence. So as you say, where the blame lies within a society, obviously it's not necessarily with the children themselves, but there is something deeply, deeply rotten at the core of a society that educates that way. And I think you brought that out without over without it being heavy-handed, without editorializing. You just showed it through their own footage, their own words, their own actions on both sides. So I do thank you for it. I hope everybody can go and see this important film somewhere, wherever they are in the world, whether it's here in the UK on the BBC or in the States or elsewhere. I know that. Tell me how people can find the best way to watch it wherever they are.
So Paramount Plus in North America, so it's the US and Canada, Channel 9 in Australia, RTL in Germany, Movistar Plus in Spain. Norway, I think, also acquired the film, and it's still going on. So there's a big distribution company taking care of this.
Well, I'm pleased, not just for you as a professional for having made this, but for all of us and for humanity to be able to see this. It is one of the darkest moments of all of our lives, and it deserves to be seen. And you have done an excellent job of bringing it to people. So thank you for that on behalf of all of us.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.